Hey, what's up everyone? Johnny the Geek here. Welcome to It's Good to Be Geek. Today I'm going to be talking about an experiment that I'll be conducting, and that is the temperature differences between various methods of applying thermal compounds. So, long story short, the three top favorite applications or talked about applications of applying thermal compound would be the P method, where you just put a little dot, right? And then the second would be a line method, which is kind of the same thing. You just draw a line over the CPU die with the thermal compound. And then the third, probably most debated and most hated, is the spread method. And so applying a thermal compound using the spread method, everyone cites that it creates air bubbles, and it's the worst possible method because it'll overheat your CPU and people get terrible temperatures, yet nobody really has temperature comparisons between these three application methods, right? So that's the video that I want to make. And so a lot of people also will cite or point me to videos where they are using a piece of acrylic plastic, right, and a CPU, and they'll apply the methods, the various methods, line, P, and spread, and then they'll show that the spread method is the worst because it has air bubbles inside. But a few problems that I have with that particular experiment is that acrylic, right, plastic, is bendable, or it can bend. So as you press down, especially on the edges here, that you'll bend it, and I'm barely, bending this, and you can't really see it, but it does bend, and it would create air bubbles, right? So that's why I think there's air bubbles there. There are other experiments that people use where they're using a piece of glass here, and I think this is probably the best method if you want to illustrate the air bubbles, or what happens when you spread thermal compounds and you press down on it, right? So I want to conduct a similar experiment, except I don't want to use these smooth surfaces with the CPU integrated heat spreader, right? Because if you look here, here is a typical and widely popular Cooler Master Hyper 212 Evo CPU cooler, and if you look there, you'll see that there's a lot of cracks, crevices, and it's just not smooth like a piece of acrylic or like a piece of glass, right? There are a lot of lines and cracks there. So if there were any air bubbles, that it would escape, in my opinion, right? I hope to actually be conducting an experiment where I'll be using this piece of glass, right, and applying thermal compound on it, and then pressing down on the CPU cooler, right? So not all CPU coolers are created equal. Some CPU coolers, like this Be Quiet Pure Rock CPU cooler, is CNC machine, so it is relatively smooth, right? On there, there is a little bit of like swirl marks on there. I don't know if you can see that, but it still isn't as smooth as glass or acrylic plastic, but it is a lot smoother than the Hyper 212, right? And so another factor in the various methods, or choosing the various methods, is that if you're going to spread, is the viscosity, right? And if you're going to spread or use the spread method, I would recommend that you use the spread method on a thermal compound that is very thick, right? That has, I guess, low viscosity is when it's thick, right? Because it's so thick, it would be difficult for it to spread itself with the pressure of the CPU cooler onto the CPU integrated heat spreader, right? So that's why I would recommend using the spread method. And I mean, if you want to use a spread method on non-thick thermal compounds, stuff that's a little thinner, that's fine too, right? So all in all, I honestly do think that the P method of applying thermal compound is the best, meaning that they all will have relatively similar or consistent temperature differences, but the P method is the best because it's the easiest to apply, right? You just squirt, dot in the middle, and then that's it. Nothing else that you have to do. The line method, you have to have a steady hand, you have to draw a specific line, and then you have to also know the orientation of the die so that you line it up correctly, and then also you might end up putting a little too much in the beginning or in the middle or in the end or whatever, so it takes a little bit of hand-eye coordination for that, right? A little bit more difficult. And then the spread method, of course, is the most tedious because you have to put some down and then spread it out, and even use some type of tool and stuff like that, right? And try to spread a very thin layer. So all in all, yes, I would say that the P method is the easiest because it's the fastest, and a lot of times I'm lazy and I don't want to do the spread method. And just the P method is just quick and easy, done, right? But everyone always cites that the spread method will just overheat your CPU, and I don't know if that's true or not. People say, oh, it's the worst, but by how much? 10 degrees, 1 degree, half a degree, right? So that's what this experiment is going to be about. And so my kind of control for this experiment is I'll be using a stock Intel CPU cooler. And so this has factory sealed applied thermal compound there, and if you notice, it kind of is in a spread kind of pattern. I mean, I guess because they can't put, well, they could have put just a middle line there, but anyways, I'm gonna first apply this onto the CPU and then get some temperature readings on there, and just sort of have a baseline of what stock CPU cooling is and how well it does, or what the temperature is on this particular CPU, which is a Intel Core i5-4670S, right? There's no specific particular reason why I chose this CPU other than it's a quad core, just like many other quad cores out there. It is a low power unit, right? It's built for efficiency. Again, not really a factor into this experiment, but I just happen to have this CPU lying around because I was doing overclocking experiment with it, and it's apparently this thing is overclockable. I don't know why, what the S moniker allows it to be overclockable, but it has an unlock multiplier. I discovered that by some random test of something else. But anyways, I could have went with the G3258, which is a very popular overclocking CPU, but I decided to use the this particular CPU just because it's quad core, right? A little bit larger CPU die. And then the rig that I have here, it's a very basic rig. It's a MSI PC Mate, what is this, Z87, I believe it is. And then I'm just gonna have regular like 8 gigs of RAM, SSD, hard drive, 1 graphics card. It's in the Corsair 600T case. Got, I think, balance pressure of cooling here with the large front fan, large rear fan, and yada yada, all that stuff. Like I said, I will be overclocking the CPU, but I'm not going to overclock the CPU really hard. I'll just overclock it just a little bit because I don't want to get it so hot to where no matter what method I apply that it's all the same, right? I want to kind of have it just right in the middle. Stock should give me a good readout, but then overclocking it also, I just want to see if I can get any type of a difference between the 3 methods. And so the 2 most important part of this experiment is that I'm going to use the Arctic Silver 5 thermal compound, which is a very thick compound, and I'm also going to use the Arctic Silver MX4 compound, which is not so thick, right? The first experiment is going to be with a not so thick compound because it's easier to do and it doesn't require any curing time. The second part of the experiment is the Arctic Silver 5, and that does require curing time, which is kind of a drag, but because it's thick, it requires about 200 hours for it to reach its optimal cooling efficiency. So that's roughly about 9 days, let's say 10 just to be on the safe side. So I gotta run each method 3 times, or each method once. That's 3 methods, and each of it 10 days long, right? So that's going to be like a month-long experiment. So that'll be like the second half. The first half is just going to be with the MX4 compound, and hopefully I get some distinguishing results. But like I said, I'm expecting all three methods to be relatively the same. And so, like I said, any of you out there who want to comment or let me know what sort of parameters I should include into this experiment. I'm going to try, when I do the temperature readings, I'm going to try to make sure that my ambient temperature is also the same throughout each method of application. And that's pretty much it. I know this has been a long video. Stay tuned for the visual experiment of applying thermal compound on with a clear glass and the CPU cooler, right? That's going to come immediately right after this video. Be sure to subscribe so you can see the other videos that I'll be doing, and leave a comment down below. Go ahead and troll if you'd like. Everyone says, oh, air bubbles this, air bubbles that, and they seem to forget that air actually does transfer heat as well. It's not just an insulator, or the absence of air is actually an insulator. I think the presence of air is not an insulator. Anyways, let me know what you think. As always, thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Happy 4th of July. That's why there's... See?